Hey guys, nice to see you today. Well, when I first got my Spark, it was really all about learning how to fly the thing and developing my pilot skills and really just getting it up in the air, getting it out there, and trying to return home safely. And for the most part, that happened pretty well. But once my piloting skills got better, my attention turned towards shooting better video. Because that was the reason I bought the Spark in the first place, is to shoot some really cool video. So what I want to do today is I want to share my 5 tips for getting better video with your Spark. And if you don't have a Spark, that's okay, because these tips are pretty much generic and they'll be applicable to any drone out there that can shoot some video. So yeah, let's just get right into it. So tip number 1 is take your time and plan your shots before launching your drone. In the beginning for me, I was just excited to fly, so I would get to a location and I just power up Sparky and send him up in the air and just start buzzing around looking for something interesting. But that was a really bad strategy, and that just resulted in me burning through my batteries really quickly, and then I would get back home and I look at my footage and I have nothing interesting or nothing useful. So I got a little bit smarter and I started shooting with more intention. So now I get to a location and I look around and I find something interesting to shoot first. And then I plan my shot. Do I want to do just an overhead shot, or maybe ascending, or perhaps I want to reveal something by flying backwards. But I really think about those shots before getting my drone up in the air. 15 minutes is a pretty short time for batteries on your Spark, so I want to bring every drop of goodness out of those batteries. And by planning my shots ahead of time, it's more likely that I'm going to capture what I want, get better footage, and go home happy. Tip number 2 is slow down. And I know that seems like a really simple idea, but by slowing down your camera movements and the movements of your drone, you're instantly going to make your footage look that much more cinematic and more dramatic. Herky-jerky, really fast movements, they just don't look good. Slower movements look much more intentional and they just look better. So there's a couple of things you can do to help you out with those slower movements. And number 1 is you can enable something called tripod mode. And I use tripod mode all the time. And what tripod mode does is it slows down the maximum speed of your Spark, and it also reduces the responsiveness of the joysticks on the remote. So you can crank on that joystick all you want and your Spark isn't going to make a fast, rapid movement. It's going to make a nice, buttery, smooth, controlled movement. The second thing you can do is you can reduce the speed of your gimbal. And you can go into settings, click on your gimbal, and you can take that maximum gimbal speed down from about 50, bring it down to like the 5 or 10 range. So when you're doing those camera movements where you're lifting your gimbal up or down, that's gonna really slow it down, and it's gonna be much better controlled movement, and it's just gonna look a lot better. So slow it down, it's gonna look great. So tip number 3 is use manual exposure. And as a photographer, I never have any of my cameras set in automatic anytime. But that's exactly what I was doing with my Spark. And when you do that, you leave all the exposure settings and all that stuff up to the software, and that's not always a good thing. So setting manual exposure is pretty easy. There's an icon below the record button in the DJI app, and you click on that, and that brings up another panel with all your camera options. So from there, you can switch from auto to manual exposure, and then you need to adjust your ISO and your shutter speed settings to be correct for your scene. As well, there's another settings option to turn on a histogram. And a histogram is just it's a graphical representation of the exposure. When you're looking at your histogram, if you're seeing everything kind of pushed way over to the right, well, you're probably blowing out your highlights, and the scene is probably overexposed. And same goes for the other side. If it's too far to the left, you're probably crushing all your shadows, and the scene is probably underexposed. So histogram can be kind of a good tool to help you dial in your exposure. And while you're looking at those settings, you might as well flip on manual white balance as well, and just pick the correct one for your scene. And by setting all these manual elements, you're basically just avoiding all the fluctuations in exposure and color while you're shooting video. And that's instantly going to make things look a lot better. And then when you take this footage into your editor and you're doing your post-processing work, it's going to make that work a lot easier. So It's going to be some playing around, but give it a try and I think you'll like the results. Tip number 4 is add some simple post-processing adjustments to make your footage look better. So I use Final Cut Pro 10, but most of these adjustments can be done with any video editing software. So let's just jump into Final Cut Pro and I'll show you a couple things. Okay, so we're in Final Cut now. I just have a simple project with one clip in it. I'm going to drag that to the timeline. And as you can see, it doesn't look too bad. I find it to be, maybe a bit flat. I shot this on an overcast day, so, it doesn't have really the best contrast or the best color. Anyhow, we can fix that pretty quickly. So we'll open up the effects panel and we'll go to our color correction here and just drag that on top of the clip. And now we just go up to our color board and we go look at our exposure. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to boost the highlights, maybe 10%. And now I'm going to go to the shadows and I'm going to bring the shadows down, maybe 5%. And you can see what that's done. It's just boosted the contrast for us. And basically that's the same as an S-curve adjustment. So if I turn off what we've done, you can see how flat it is. Turn it on, and then you get that nice boost to the contrast. So that's a very simple adjustment you can make to give your footage a bit more pop right away. Now the second thing we can do here is go back into our color board and look at saturation. Spark footage comes pretty sharp and pretty saturated, but I just find this image could use maybe a touch more saturation. Like I said, it was a cloudy day, so it's just a bit dull to me. So I'm going to just bring the global saturation maybe 15%, just to give it just a bit more color. So let's go back and let's turn off these adjustments and see how it looks. So you can see there, it's pretty flat, pretty dull. Put our adjustments back on, and right away we have just a nice boost to color and contrast. Easy peasy. So one final thing you can do to give your footage a nice cinematic look is you can put those framing bars on the top and bottom. And that's really easy to do in Final Cut. Just go into our crop here and 125 pixels on the top, 125 pixels on the bottom, and look at that. We have our nice framing bars to give it that real cool cinematic look. So bring it up full screen, and I think that looks pretty good. There you go. A few simple adjustments and your footage just has a bunch more pop. Tip number 5 is experiment and have fun. I like to fly close to things, underneath things. I like to fly through trees. And a lot of that just came from the desire to be more creative and experiment. And above all, I want to be having fun out there. And if you're not having fun, what's the point, right? So get out there, experiment, be creative, have some fun, and let's see what you come up with.
I'm like, I don't have him.
I was like the worst camp ever.